Hi, everyone. I'm so excited.
I'm thrilled.
Yeah.
I'm so thrilled. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, no, we're very excited to have you. I was so excited when Kaylee reached out and was like, Jodi-Ann Burey's having a book. They want you to do it. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'll do it. Excuse me if I geek out. I like to say, Kaylee read the front of my bio. And the other thing is that I'm the manager of culture, people and culture here in the bookstore. And so typically when folks see my bio, they go, oh, you work at a bookstore?
Yeah.
And it's like, and now I'm going to say, yeah, you should read Authentic. Because that's literally why I work at a bookstore, right?
Yeah.
Because of the literally verbatim experiences that you describe in your book. And one of the main things that you said that I think about often is how a healthful work oftentimes does not come with health insurance.
Yeah.
And the inverse is true. And so, yeah, no, it's very real. And when I got the book and I started to read it, I actually had to put it down. I was telling you earlier, I had to put it down at first because I wasn't prepared for someone to relay it so accurately. I wasn't prepared for that just yet. But thank you. Thank you so much for it because it's spot on. It's just absolutely spot on.
Yeah. Well, thank you and sorry. I think when you write about injustice, it's really difficult. We were talking about that. It's really difficult to say, I'm so happy that my book is relatable to your experience. I'm so happy this resonates with you. And I wish that my book was old. Mm-hmm. You know, I wish that my nieces could read it and be like, Auntie, that was like 20 years ago, something like that. Mm-hmm. But the fact that, and my nieces and nephews, the book is dedicated to them, the fact that my two eldest nieces that are currently in the workforce are experiencing how we're having professional experiences that are not that much different than my own is horrifying. At the same time, I'm glad to be able to, or what I wanted to do was to give kind of written language or verbal language to the things that we feel, as marginalized folks within the workplace. I often describe that the eye roll of a Black woman, if you put that in words, could fill multiple bookstores of what that one eye roll could mean. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to take that physical language, that emotional language that we have for our work experiences and put them in a book. And so that's what Authentic is.
Yeah, and I would love to jump off on that piece of wanting to take what we feel in our bodies and articulate it on the page. Can we use that as an opportunity to read a little bit of chapter 2, which is the patterns of weathering, which I will say I was so comforted by seeing Dr. Arlene's work of weathering show up in your work. Because I feel like it immediately set the tone for like the psychosocial paradigm that the rest of the book explores. So,
yeah. Wait, where do you want me to read from?
I would love if you can go from the paragraph right before I left everything in my office.
Oh, it's Marissa's story. Yeah. So, that last paragraph before?
Mm-hmm. And then into...
Okay, actually, I'm going to start a little bit before. Okay. Taking some license here. Okay. Do I want to start there? Yeah, I'll start there. Okay. Our bodies are the most authentic part of being human, but the culture of work demands we prioritize our livelihoods over our lives, even when our minds and bodies start to function in unfamiliar and inconvenient ways. Will I be able to work? What will I tell my manager? What about health insurance? How much time can I take off? Care for our bodies contradicts learned ideals of success, safety, and status. Sometimes we become sick because of work. We bear it saying, I need to leave, but how? This is bad, but I can hold out a bit longer. Little by little, and sometimes all at once, work is killing us. There is no strategy in a slow death. I reached out to dozens of Black workers and other workers of color about authenticity in their careers. Each conversation lasted at least an hour, and without exception, everyone shared how racial stressors at work affected their health. Friends I knew well, whose health journeys I witnessed in real time, revealed stories I had never heard until our interview. Each story added to my rage and sense of hopelessness. As I spoke to more people, I realized our linked fate of racial marginalization is a mode of belonging through recognition. Listening, sharing, and connecting stories are acts of care for my community and for myself.
Thank you. Why the workforce, right? So when I was reading the prologue and even into chapter 2, I was like, this is stuff that's every day. Like every day, everywhere, all the time. Grocery store, coffee shop, you name it. And so why center the environment of the book in the workforce?
Yeah, so I can give a little context. The prologue, and I'm so sorry because it can trigger some people, it kind of goes through each month of 2020. Mm-hmm. January, February, March, all the way through, and does a major time jump to January 2025. And what that details is just kind of this flip-floppy nature that institutions have when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, how much they want to stand up for social justice, the ways that they trade on our identities as women, people of color, disabled folks, queer folks, and the intersections of all of these and more. Mm-hmm. How easy and quickly they can just change their minds. And so at the beginning of 2020, I just started a new job, and it was not it. It was not it at all. And I remember being like, I have to get out of here. I cannot work here anymore. Mm-hmm. Within just 2 weeks, my first check-in with my manager, she says, it seems like you have a race agenda.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, yeah, girl, that's why you hired me. Like, you found me. Like, it's so crazy because she poached me. I had a job. So you hit me up to do, what did you think I was supposed to do? Mm-hmm. And then I started working there, and I'm like, there are 2 Black women on this entire campus. I was there for 2 months before it closed for COVID, and I only saw 2 other Black women. I think there are like 1,500 people on that campus. And so right in the beginning of 2020, if you were in people functions, DEI functions, or if they just needed to swoop you up in mass layoffs, a lot of the people that I know, Black and brown people, especially who had those jobs, were among the first that were fired or furloughed. Mm-hmm. A couple of months later, when George Floyd is murdered and the movement for Black lives is gaining traction around the country and the world, I cannot tell you what my inbox looked like, to the point where that company that laid me off, an executive reached out to me to support with how they would respond to this thing. I'm like, I don't work here anymore, but I'm happy to come on as a paid consultant. And then I never heard from them again. And so then you see these organizations, these companies. I mean, I got an email from Petco telling me how much they stand for Black lives. And so that was all of 2020, and then it started to dwindle as soon as white fatigue started to set in. And then we experienced the backlash for, that I've never experienced something like that in my lifetime, of everyone is really trying to rally for this racial reckoning. And so the book was always trying to speak to the way that these institutional narratives are so fickle, very fair-weathered, and they're only checking for us when there's something to gain. But as soon as there's no money in it, as soon as there's no more gold stars, as soon as it's inconvenient, when the political incentives change, then they're like, all right, cool, we don't have to do this no more. And we're in the wake of that right now. And so I wanted to focus on work because that dynamic operates everywhere. You know, there's a big chunk in this book where I talk about Insecure. And there was this one era where HBO Max, they were just like, black shows, brown shows, like, I was like, yeah, come on, HBO, we in this. And then it didn't take that long. Legendary is canceled. Like, all of these shows that I loved were canceled. And we see that with the, you know, how many black shows did we have in the 90s? They're gone. And so it could have been any industry, any facet of life. But I think work has been such a big part of, I mean, all of our lives. And, you know, in a lot of ways, for better or for worse, a lot times worse, part of our identities and how we see ourselves, to the point where the way we're treated within the workplace, these institutional narratives, become the way that we see ourselves, become the way that we value ourselves. And I just wanted to give some language to that.
Okay, because you brought it up, which I did not cue her to bring this up.
Okay.
It's literally one of my favorite parts, and I underlined it.
Okay.
So in the part where she's talking about Insecure, that chapter opens up with the first pilot episode of Insecure. Lawrence is on the couch being a brokey, okay? But we understand that it's depression.
Yeah.
And later on it says, Insecure grapples with what happens when achievement and following the rules fail to yield success, status, and safety as promised. I noticed Lawrence's gray overworn Georgetown t-shirt first. The shirts are always more comfortable than the schools.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
right there, I was like, now let me tell you something, okay? It is not Sunday and I did not sign up for church. But let me, the shirts are always more comfortable than the schools. It's spot on. It is spot on. And then you go on to talk about how, but not even armpit threads bare for 2 decades of sweat stains on my college shirts would have me squander its social cachet indoors. College paraphernalia belonged outside, not out like fine dining on first dates, out like the first appointment with a new doctor. Out in places where signifying even a modicum of shared pedigree, with people for whom shared pedigree matters, can soften the friction race creates in what should be a frictionless interaction. One logo across my chest, and I am believed, acknowledged, and respected by anyone from surgeons to elevator door holders.
Damn, a bar.
A bar. The bars in this book is absurd. Like, do you understand me?
I used to be a rapper.
Clearly.
You know.
Clearly. So, I want to use that to talk about that cycle.
Okay.
Right? Because that's a cycle. It's a cycle to, one, be given the understanding that you will be perceived in your black body. To, two, have to strategize. How am I going to not warp this perception, but how I'm going to make sure that you are reading what I wrote, right? And we're oftentimes taught that that's getting a particular status or acquiring a particular pedigree, right? Mm-hmm. Which leads us to these jobs.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, that can put you in pretty precarious situations, right? You pursue employment at these like incredible companies or companies that seem incredible on paper, and then you go there and you are discriminated against, abused, bullied. They're stealing your wages, which I think wage theft is a more accurate way to talk about pay inequity. Wage theft is also a more accurate way to talk about opportunity gaps, right? The ways that people can be promoted over you even though they're not as talented, or even though you trained them. And so I think there are ways that we, especially when you have any type of marginalized identity, you want to signal status. You want to show that, hey, I'm not like these stereotypes of the demographic communities I'm a part of, which itself is so complicated. But when I'm talking about every time I go to a doctor's office, I put on a Boston College something or a University of Michigan something, because then that might save my life today. But it's also the reality that that shit don't matter. You still Black. And so there's this way that we reach or might reach for these status signifiers, or we work in places so we can gain those status signifiers with the knowledge, because I think, for our communities, we still know that it's not enough. But we try. In the prologue, I talk about going to Black Lives Matter protest and feeling really anxious that I witnessed the police pull a Black protester out of his wheelchair, and how unsafe I felt, one, just being in public around that time, but as someone who has a disability, I have a spinal cord injury, and I didn't feel safe being at a Black Lives Matter march. And so I brought my cane, which I didn't need, I just have it, in the off chance that that would matter. But the reality is that it doesn't. It doesn't make me more sympathetic. But if it could today, then maybe I could save my body or save the people that I'm with. But I think that's the hard part of trying to reach for things that we're told can protect us. We try to protect ourselves with achievement. But look at Serena Williams, right? She didn't have the easiest time in her career, because her excellence is what also made her a target. And so I think just trying to grapple with that throughout the book, and grappling in the process of writing the book, what I then realized is maybe I need to redefine what status means. I need to redefine what success means. Because if I'm reaching for things that ultimately can harm me, or I'm reaching for things that still will not protect me, then I might as well be in community with people who actually care about me, who will actually protect me. Institutions don't do that. Your community does.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that community, sometimes it looks like them already knowing better, which you talked about in the book, which is all the Black people I knew better. And so can you talk a bit about the after effects of the psychological cycle of trusting the workforce and then harm happening, that betrayal, right? So that looks like that person who poached you from your job calling you in 2 months into your DEI job, telling you that you have a race agenda. You being ousted, and then going back to your people for them to be like, we tried to warn you.
It's so funny. I'm often that person that be like, girl, you sure you want to work there? I don't know. But, do you? And it's not for me to say, don't do this or don't do that, right? I think everyone has their own goals that they're trying to meet by the decisions that they make. So for me, there's a recurring refrain within the prologue that's like, all the Black people I knew better, all the Black people I knew were laughing, all the Black people I knew were scared. Just what I wanted with that recurring, with that refrain, was to let the reader know that I don't think Black people are stupid. The first sentence of the book is Black people do not need to be any more authentic. There is a way that we understand ourselves. There's a way that we understand institutions and the relationship and the difference between the two that has this internal knowing. There's this even a collective understanding that institutions cannot be trusted. And so even though we're moving in spaces, we know what the deal is. And so as we're trying to see all right, y'all really care about Black lives? Y'all don't really care about Black lives, but let's just see. And so there's this idea that even as, political incentives are changing, that people are getting more or less interested in racial equity and social justice, that our communities, or the communities that I'm a part of, already knows kind of what's up. And so that's really what that is about, where I don't believe that, folks who experience the world through any type of marginalization are duped into believing that institutions can protect us. I think we want to, because maybe the alternative is despair or cynicism, but there's this way that we know that I wanted to respect my communities and saying, like, I know that we know this. Yeah.
Yeah. The spectacle of it, because that, first off, thank you for giving me that language. In the book, you talk about particularly the spectacle of or the illusion of all these things that these institutions think that they're doing, and how they try to convince you that they're doing it. And I would love for you to read a little bit of chapter 10, which talks about the spectacle of accommodations, right? So when we start to get into the conversation regarding disabilities, we start off actually, right, in the prologue, you're at a protest, and you see that human getting pulled from their chair. Later on in the book, we follow your journey from you getting your call and how your physical ability changed. And then it leads us to this conversation on the spectacle of accommodation.
Okay, cool. Where do you want me to read from?
Yes. Actually, can you start at the top of that chapter?
Oh, of accommodations? About my suicidality? Okay, great. Trigger warning. We gonna talk about depression. So before I read that, this section, so the book is divided into like big chunks of chapters. And so this is within the authenticity as spectacle. And so there are different spectacles that I'm kind of teasing out here, like what are the limits of representation, and what are the spectacle of differences, like the way that we want to I feel like institutions define authenticity through markers of difference, which what I call like the accoutrements of identity. And so even me having like my hair out like this is me trying to especially signal Blackness in a way. And so institutions would define natural hair as authentic when it's like, so if my hair was straight, am I less Black? Like, that's just like not how that works, And so just trying to kind of divorce like the spectacle of these differences and like what actual authenticity is. And so for this chapter, I was looking at accommodations and this reasonable accommodations and really testing the limits of, everyone talks about how accommodating they are, but are they really? Where do you want me to stop?
Where you feel like it.
All right. Amen. Okay. The spectacle of accommodations. The end of a brief situationship left behind a trail of loneliness, self-hate, worthlessness, and grief. I tried to find a way out, but lost myself instead. I made a home there, nestled in depression's debris, until it took the shape of something bigger than me, separate from me. Frances. I named my depression Frances. Frances was a clingy companion. Everyone knew about Frances, even at the org. I sent WFH emails more than usual. A more accurate subject line would read, working from bed, or working from suicidal ideations, or working from emptiness. The days I dragged Frances to the office, despair flooded my face. There was nowhere to hide her. A few of my closest work friends noticed and invited me to places Frances hated. The community garden across the street, the dock near the houseboats on the lake, or the French bakery by the bridge with the best lemon tarts and salmon salad sandwiches in town. I always ordered an Americano, extra hot, dark, and bitter. I did not want to die, but I did not want to live, and so I did not eat. My best friend at work sometimes brought me homemade meals for lunch, but her kindness could not save my wasting body. I lost 15 pounds in less than a month. When colleagues complimented my new slender figure, I laughed and twirled. Thank you so much. It's my depression. Francis was hurting me and liked to show off. I left Seattle for a 3-week business trip to Malawi, Liberia, and Senegal to co-facilitate community workshops, advance a new multi-year, multi-million-dollar program with an organizational partner, and moderate a panel on adolescent health, respectively. Frances followed. She waited at the hotel while I visited village health centers with my team. Once I was alone, Frances swallowed me whole. I crawled through my mind's shadows, ever tethered to the sounds of words that might keep me awake and alive. I journaled until my hands numbed. I recorded videos of myself ugly crying. Because the internet bandwidth was unable to stream endless hours of procedural dramas, my usual escape, I listened to the same 90-minute podcast interview with Ta-Nehisi Coates every day. The only book I packed, We Are Never Meeting in Real Life by Samantha Irby, cover to cover 3 times. The 10-hour time difference allowed only a brief window each day to speak in real time with someone who loved me. The isolation got too real this time. I needed to go home. On my last night in Liberia, I received notice that the conference in Senegal had been canceled last minute due to a security threat. Waves of relief gave way to unexpected sorrow. I mourned my chance to drown Frances in the Atlantic Ocean. I wanted to float with the weightlessness of her demise. I wanted my belly buoyed by fried plantains and fresh fish. Perhaps I could have ignored the email and traveled to Senegal anyway. My flights and hotel were already booked. But Frances hissed over my shoulder. I returned to Seattle the next day. Frances kicked my ass, I joked with my manager when she asked how the trip went. I left out the ugly crying videos, but I was honest about Frances. I admitted I did not feel safe traveling again until my mental health stabilized. Our conversation continued as usual, especially since I had no upcoming travel scheduled. But a few days later, HR called a meeting. I'll stop there. Mm-hmm. Dun, dun, dun. The meeting did not go well. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Yeah. What had you include that? Why tell us that?
Well, what I love about the title of the book, Authentic, is that it became the North Star for all the decisions that I made. When you're talking about being authentic, when you're talking about being a whole person, it really has to include more than the person who's just like sitting at their desk doing emails. And the reality is that, and I talk about suicidality and depression in 2 different instances in the book, is that going through that drastically impacted my work life, like intensely impacted my work life. I couldn't function. Like that trip to Malawi was probably one of the lowest points of my life. And I was really at the brink of my own survival, and being able to even hide that a little bit to just tell somebody like, hey, I can't travel. I didn't anticipate that that would become this like huge HR issue. And then we're talking about, can I travel? It's required that I travel, and we're having this back and forth. And that was the instance where I first learned the term like, reasonable accommodations. And so it seemed that my definition of what was reasonable was not the same as what my organization thought was reasonable. And that friction and that experience taught me something about how institutions treat people with disabilities. And that became the foundation of how I approached when I wasn't dealing with like mental illness as a disability, but when I was dealing with a physical, visible disability when I came back after my spinal surgery, and how different that was when you can visibly cue disability versus when you have to disclose and advocate for something that people can't see. So that experience wasn't just an experience, but it was a foundation of learning and generating knowledge and looking, and I cite a lot of disability scholars and crip theorists throughout the book, and I wouldn't have been pushed to do that had I not felt the tensions between the things that I need from people who know me. At that point, I'd worked there for 4 years, and when the weight of the institution starts to interfere with my humanity at work.
Yeah. For someone who's experiencing that, what would you say your suggestion is? Right? Because it's very easy to look at the TED Talk or look at your other interviews and say, okay, so she's telling me not to work. Like, it don't matter. She's just saying the answer is don't work. And clearly we know that that's not sustainable, right? And there are some of us who have that privilege and have more agency over where we go to work, how we go to work, right? And in that there's advocacy, and I think you do an amazing job at modeling that advocacy throughout the book. But for folks who either don't recognize that agency for themselves or maybe don't have it, what is that suggestion?
Yeah. So I am not in the advice business. I think there are plenty of people out there that do tactical strategies of, the day-to-day decision-making of work. This is a book of criticism.
Mm-hmm.
This is also, for me, a health intervention. I have my dear friend here who I met when we got our master's degree in public health. And so for me, I created this book through that lens. And so I don't want to give advice, but I do recognize that. And there's a writer in Seattle who I heard say this at an event once, that work is one of the most coercive elements of our survival. Like, we have to work to take care of ourselves, to take care of our families, have access to health insurance. It's incredibly coercive, and takes away from our health and well-being, as it also provides the resources to support our health and well-being. It's like an abusive relationship. And so for me, I don't have advice, but I do have some considerations that I've outlined in the book, that kind of figuring out what success means to you, what ambition means to you, what status means to you is probably your best bet. When I was actually going through that breakup, a friend once told me that closure is something that you give yourself. And so I think there's this way of being that we can give ourselves and how we can transform our relationship to work. Mm-hmm. I had a conversation with someone about the book during one of my writing residencies, and I'm not saying that this is causal. I'm not saying that I said this thing and this thing happened. Mm-hmm. But there is a relationship, of the ways that the TED Talk has even gotten people to quit their jobs. And I'm like, so I'm not paying for your life, right? So you hit me up on LinkedIn telling me that you quit your job, that you've been working for 10 years, And so the way I had to emotionally deal with that is that there was something that they heard that triggered something that they were already deciding on. And so what I hope for people who read the book, that there's already something that you're considering, that maybe this book can give you the permission that you do not need, but perhaps had been seeking. And so I hope that this book does that, not only just as an internal process, but can draw people together, that they can pursue actions that, towards the end of the book, the biggest kind of call to action I have is building community beyond an institutional gaze. Mm-hmm. Look at your networks. What are the ways that you're connecting with other people who work? What are ways that you are building community? And who's watching that? They always say, Black people are never alone because there's always a white person in your business.
Okay.
We are constantly surveilled. And so what are ways that we can build relationships with each other beyond that gaze? Mm-hmm. and then we'll see what happens. I don't talk about post-work theory in much detail, but I do hint at it. There are a couple of disability scholars that are trying to imagine a new way of being, that what if we didn't have to work in order to take care of ourselves? And so I do think that there are fantastic ideas and theories and substantive policies, universal health care, universal child care, guaranteed income, those type of things that we can reimagine how our relationship to work at a national scale. But in the meantime, I think we have to kind of divorce ourselves from those narratives that says that who we are is defined by what we do for work.
Yeah, and would you argue that a better way of looking at it is who we are is defined by who we're with? That community piece.
Yeah.
Which is central to the healing part, right?
Yeah.
We were talking about it earlier with how it's very easy to say that this is a health book. It's very easy to say that this is a book about psychological trauma in the workplace.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we definitely don't want to skip over is the healing piece, right? So we talk about trauma and we go through these cycles. And then we do talk about the body wanting to heal and the person wanting to heal, and community and kinship is key to that healing.
Yeah.
And can you talk about a little bit more the importance of that to that healing piece?
Yeah, for sure. I will tell you, in writing this book, and writing is so isolating. You spend so much time alone. So it was kind of messed up for me to think about, you need to be with people as I'm sitting here by myself. Like, don't talk to me. Like, I had friends like, hey, come over for Thanksgiving, come over. And I'm like, I can't do it. I have to write. And it's just like, I'm trying to write about being in community. I can't come to your dinner. It's just like, you sound unwell, right? And I wasn't. Like, there are a lot of ways that when I was writing, I would get into these really unhealthy practices where you're just like spending too much time alone, or maybe you start reproducing narratives that you don't believe in, because what I was confronting is that I'm saying that we need to be in community and we need to have our people, and we need to gather beyond the institutional gaze, but I'm looking at my phone and I'm like, I'm not in community with anybody. Pandemic, we're at the end of the shutdown, the lockdown. So I've been alone for several years, just me and my dog. Now I work for myself, so I don't interact with a lot of people day to day. Like, you hear talking about community and you don't know nobody. And so it was incredibly confronting for me to realize that there's something absent in my professional life. It's not enough for me to be well. It's not enough for me to like work for myself and be able to go snowboarding on a Tuesday, which I love to do. Like, that is great, but you're alone and it's not enough. And so if you're alone, you are not safe. And so I think one of the best outcomes, and why I love hearing the bio, because I added recently this reading series that I started in Seattle called Lit Lounge, The People's Art. And I hit up a friend of mine. We used to work together. And I said, hey, I have this idea. I just want to do this reading series, and we're going to have free food, and we're going to have a DJ, and we're going to have people read, their work. And the very first question she asked me was, is this supposed to be profitable? I said, absolutely not. We're doing this for the people. And so that allowed me to build relationships with, the coffee shop, and now we got food vendors, and now I know like DJs and stuff, like I'm cool, right? And so like now I know so many people in Seattle who come out. We sell out tickets every single time. This next week, Jesus, I have so many things to do before next Friday. So next Friday is our 5th installation of that. And there's 100 people that come out on a Friday night to listen to some poems. That's crazy. And so being in those spaces and seeing people see each other, to see new relationships form because of Lit Lounge, like, it's something that I've created for myself, like having this network of people that do this event with me, but also the people who show up. That's why it's called The People's Art. Every single person here is a part of building this community. Community is art, and art is how we survive. And so the book pushed me to leave the book in a way and just get out in the world and look at my relationships differently. And that's been incredibly rewarding, to build those community connections and, interpersonal relationships that I didn't have. And so now if something goes down, like I already know that my team, we have a hospitality team of like 6 to 8 people. We work together all the time, like, and nobody's watching this, so there are other ways that we can build things that, can challenge institutions, but it's hard to do that work if you're not already in community with people that you trust.
I'm going to ask one last question,
Okay.
and then I'm going to pause so
Okay.
that we can open it up for other folks to ask a question. So for many folks, their intro to you may have been your TED Talk, which is about 4 going on 5 years ago, right? And the book is now. And so though they are speaking about the same thing, there has been about 4 to 5 years of time. So how would you say the book departs from that TED Talk, from folks who may have only known you from that? And they're like, well, why would I buy Authentic? I could just watch the TED Talk.
Yeah. Thank you for that. It's funny because the TED Talk starts the book, it's in the prologue, because that's what I was working on for most of 2020. After I was joyfully unemployed, I was like, ooh, let me apply for TED. Let's see what's up. So that was most of my year, just working on TED. And then the day that I filmed TED was the day that the election results came out that said that Biden won. And so that starts the book. And having been from the TED Talk until now, the epilogue actually leads up to the 2024 election. So I did not plan for the book to be bookended by these 2 elections and the implications of those decisions. And oddly enough, even though there are some details that I sprinkle throughout the book that are more recent, as of even 2025, of things that have happened, the actual argument of the book never changed because it was always speaking to this cycle. But what I think is interesting about the difference between the TED Talk and the book is that a TED Talk is a product, right? It's 15 minutes. When you apply, you tell them what your idea is that's worth sharing. So there's this sense that you've already been kind of thinking through it. You have like your argument that you want to make. And so you're just presenting this final idea. A book, you have so much space to show process. And so when I started writing the book, I didn't know how it would end. I was just taking a chapter at a time and writing it out of order. And the prologue wasn't even written until I was almost done. I submitted the entire book. I was like, oh yeah, I'm good, ow. And then my agent is like, so you need another chapter? I said, where? Another chapter? I don't have it. I'm so spent. I've written so much. And then kind of having to go back in and added the epilogue, which I'm just obsessed with, adding that to the book. And so there's this way that it's iterative that you can't really do in a TED Talk. There's so much space to not just show your own thinking, but what I love about this is it's written with the approach of collective narration. There's so many other people's voices in the book. Some people that are in this room. I interviewed people that I know, people that I didn't know. I secretly recorded my parents, and those words are in the book. I told my mom, and she said, you know you have to pay me for that, right? I said, I don't. And so you can't do that in a TED Talk. You can't really bring other people's voices. You can't do collective narration in that way. You can't have the nuances, the ways that I'm shifting language, moving from even reasonable accommodations, which I don't believe in, to access needs. Am I meeting my access needs or not? Because one thing I know about disabled people is that we do the most accommodating. And so those type of kind of wrestling with language doesn't exist in a TED Talk, but it exists in the book.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to pause there, like I said, and we're going to open the floor for you all and any question that you have.
Or I can read if you don't have questions.
I have a question. I've had the pleasure of knowing you since 2013 when I first heard you talk in risk communications at Michigan, and I was just like really drawn to your combination of thoughtfulness and just precision, and I don't think there's anybody that can talk or just communicates like you. I think you're supremely unique, and I also felt like that when I was reading this book. But I'm curious, like just on a personal reflective note, like did anything surprise you about yourself? Like did you kind of grow in any unexpected ways in writing this book?
Thank you so much, Matt. In a lot of ways. I'll do 2 ways, in the process and then even after. I didn't know that my disability experience would occupy so much of the book, which surprised me, and it kind of deepened my relationship with my disability identity. It's not just to have the lived experience of disability, but the ways that I claim disability and the ways as an identity. And it pushed me to, if I'm gonna reference ideas, I need to cite my sources. And so there were huge periods of time in writing the book when I wasn't even writing. I'm just reading crip theory and reading from different disability scholars, and particularly crip of color theorists, so people of color who are within the disability field. That really challenged me in all the best ways. And so that was probably like my favorite part. Maybe that's why that shows up so much throughout the book. And I think afterwards, and this is just like more of a personal thing, but I've always had this idea of myself that I don't finish anything. I used to say that I live my life the way I wash my dishes, which, as an immigrant, I've been liberated from dishwashing because now I definitely do use the dishwasher. Like, it's not just the drying rack. Like, I run that shit, But when I was washing the dishes, I didn't have to finish it. Like, I could just leave a spoon or plate, and I'm like, that's enough. Like, I've really been standing here for 30 minutes washing dishes. Like, I'm done now. And so I feel like in my life, that's how I was doing. I would just work on something enough, and I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do this anymore. And I would never finish, but mentally and emotionally, I feel like I would finish. If you ever want to hear a song that haunts me, look up Infinity Song Haters Anthem. Oh my God. First of all, Infinity Song, it's a Black sibling yacht rock group.
Oh my goodness.
I'm obsessed with them. And it's like, I love the way it feels to be a hater. And it's basically talking about like, yeah, if I wanted to try, I would have made it, but you suck, but I would have been better than you if I actually finished. And so you just like live your life being a hater and you feel good about that. And I was like, yo, are they talking about me? Like, so anyway, there were so many times in writing the book where I was like, there's no way this is actually going to happen. Like, I know there's a deal. I know there's an agent. I know there's an editor. There's this whole institution that's like, bitch, we're in pages. But I'm like, something's gonna happen and it's just gonna fall apart. So the fact that like I actually have a book that other people have read and are reading and are talking to me about, that I'm on this tour, it's just kind of blowing my mind that those narratives about myself just aren't true, because if it was true, then I wouldn't be here. And so I have a journal specifically for tour where I'm trying to let this goal not just look good on Instagram, because that's not what it's about, but how does it change my own narrative about who I am? And so that's what I've been feeling really transformed by. The song's amazing. Is everyone going to listen to it afterwards?
Yeah, we have to now. We have to. It's going to be compulsive. I'm just going to listen to it the moment I'm out of this chair.
Yep.
Can you read for us a section from the book that you haven't gotten to read from yet?
Okay. I know exactly what I'm going to read. It's a page and a half, if that's okay. I was supposed to read this at the end of my New York event, and we didn't get to it. So I'm going to read that. Also, for people in the room who know me, I would love for you to sign my book after. I've turned it into a little bit of a scrapbook. My nieces and nephews have a book, and the book is dedicated to them, so I put a photo of them in there. And then a good friend of mine who's quoted a gazillion times throughout the book. Speaking of community, there's not a single chapter of this book that he and I did not talk about on the phone. And so he sent me a candle that said smells like a published author. And then it came with this note. And so his note is on this page. So I want to read it because I want to read it, but I also want to look at this note from Franz. So it's the penultimate chapter of the book right before the epilogue. It's called, Who Are We Visioning With? How am I nurturing my relationships? Where do I gather beyond the institutional gaze? I tell myself I don't have time, or what I am doing is not enough. And in those lies, I attempt to mask anxieties that say caring for myself will hurt my career. In this search for clarity, I turn to the work of abolitionists because they have the wildest imaginations. They see a world where police and prisons do not exist. The vision feels too grand for my mind to hold. The idea of no prisons does not even make sense. The idea of a healthy professional life does not even make sense. How can we work and be physically, emotionally, morally, and financially well? That, to me, sounds as untethered as no prisons. Yet the questions remain. How do we dismantle what harms us? Can we imagine funding flowing from police departments to systems that address the actual conditions of violence, income inequity, housing, education, healthcare, and social support? Can we imagine care rather than control? Audre Lorde told us, when I dare to be powerful and use my strength in the service of my vision, it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid. What is the vision I am in service of? With whom do I vision with? How do we become resources for each other? Where am I building professional care collectives? Actual care involves more than mentorship. Mutual aid ensures our safety and well-being no matter what we do or where we work. What would it take to ensure the people I am in community with are healthy? This is not a careerist notion of thriving or hustling. It is a matter of well-being. What would it mean for every single person I know to have a healthy professional life? One where they feel safe, secure, supported, creative, empowered, and trusted. What tools or beliefs can lead to this kind of transformation? It is possible because I know people who have this already. And that's because they have people. This vision requires we shed narratives that confine us. It is an invitation to revise, to envision, to act, and to hold space for one another in ways that feel radical and essential. If I can begin to nurture my relationships with intention, if I can weave my life into the lives of others with compassion and purpose, perhaps I too can contribute to a future where possibility reigns over punishment, where connection replaces isolation. That, I believe, is the heart of abolition, an unwavering belief in the power of our collective imagination to reshape our world. Is agency possible within work? Is liberation possible under capitalism? Everything we've faced and everything we want must meet us in our everyday action, reshaping myths about success, redefining authenticity for ourselves, working to survive while working to live. To just be a person on our own terms is a struggle. We might not win, but it is our job to try.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for.
Thank you so
No,
much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so
Thank-
much.
Thank you so much. You think much. Thank y'all so much for being
Thank you.
here with us tonight. Genuinely. Did you have a question?
What is your disability?
So I have a spinal cord injury. Almost 8 years ago, they found a tumor inside of my spinal cord. And so the doctor said that if I don't have surgery, I would be paralyzed from the neck down for the rest of my life. But the surgery can paralyze me from the neck down for the rest of my life. And so a lot of the symptoms that I was having before were bad, but not as bad as what it means to have a spinal cord injury when someone cuts into your back. And so in the years since, I've had to relearn how to walk, relearn how to use my hands. And then as a result, I have a lot of just mobility and fatigue issues as a result of the spinal cord injury. So it impacts my everyday life. Yeah. Thank you for asking. And also, if someone asks you about your disability and you don't want to tell them, you don't have to. But I'm choosing to because I already disclosed it in the book.
Yeah. I was going to say, it's in the book.
It's in the book.
It's part of the call.
Yeah, it's part of the call, yeah. Okay.